So Linda, let's learn a little bit about you while you're here. Where's home for you? Where are you located?
I live in Rochester Hills, which is a suburb of Detroit in Michigan,
Okay. And how long have you been long arm quilting?
since 1999.
1999. Did they have long arm quilting in 1999?
Yes, they did. And just for reference, there was no stitch regulator. There was an on-off button. There was a speed button. And if you were lucky, there was a light.
Gotcha. And did you have a gamma way back then?
My first machine was not a Gamma, but my second and third both are Gamels.
Okay, okay.
So did you start your business with that first machine?
No, I didn't start my business until I got the Gamma.
Hmm.
It's a funny story. I got that machine from a lady who was doing decorator type sewing. She was doing like bedspreads and it was a really old machine. It had an on-off switch and no light, but it was really cheap. It was like $600. Um, and I practiced on that, and then it quickly became obvious that I needed something a little more robust. So we flew to Missouri. There were no dealers back then, and I actually bought my first machine from Ken Gamble himself.
Hmm. We've come full circle now because it's the same way again now where people buy direct from the factory.
Yeah, so a
Although
long
we have
time.
a little more support now than just a 1-800 number.
Yes, yes. As I know well, I talk to many of them each day. So, Linda, did you say you have two gamels now, or
No, I sold the other one.
okay,
I'm down to one, which is fine.
okay. And
Um,
do you still have? Is it a hand guided or what type of machine do
no, it's
you?
a Statler.
Okay, okay,
Yeah,
excellent.
I my first one was a hand guided. Again, no stitch regulator. We were so excited we had a needle up and down button. And
That's cutting edge technology.
channel locks in one direction. So I thought I was really uptown with that one.
Thanks to our associate producer, Holly, the episode that you were in before is episode 17.
Oh,
So
Okay.
okay.
I went looking for
Did
it. I could not find it.
did you get a message from Holly?
I sure did.
Okay.
So I've just upgraded her status to executive producer.
Okay. Okay. Wonderful. Well, Linda, what has been new or exciting in your quilting business since we talked to you last?
Well, interestingly, there's been I think a little shift in what I'm seeing. Primarily, I have been known for years as a custom quilter. I've quilted show quilts forever. I've got gobs of ribbons hanging up on the walls. And so my core business was always very intense show quilting. And I've seen a shift, and I don't know if it's budgetary or time or family or what's driving it. But I used to see every quilt from customers, something that was high-end custom, and now I'm seeing more mid-range and edge to edge, which is kind of good because, if you're doing a high-end custom, it's in that machine for a long time. And I'm not super fast, I love to mix both hand guided and computer assisted. Um, so that's been kind of a pleasant thing that I'm seeing. And I don't really know what the reason is. I can surmise, but that's something that I've seen the last couple of years.
So that's what you're seeing more of a request and demand for is the edge to edge and
Yeah, I mean, I still have quite a few customers that every quilt they bring, they want it, quilted to within an inch of its life. Um, but that used to be every quilt, and I would just pray, someone, please bring me an edge to edge.
Hmm. Um, with having had a real solid background in doing show quilts, um, you must have found some kind of shortcuts or ideal ways to talk with the customer about what their budget is for this quilt and what their vision is. Can you let people in on some of the things that you found that work well?
Yes, I have kind of an intake sheet that asks some very specific questions. How's this quilt going to be used? What are your goals for this quilt? Um, what do you envision it to look like? And you'd be amazed when you start asking in-depth questions of your customers, how much input they really want to give you. Whereas if they just say, oh, well, do something custom, I don't know what, you're like,
Right.
Um,
Where do you go with that? Yeah.
well, yeah, and then if you miss it, they're unhappy. Um, but it's communication and I think it's important and a lot of customers don't really know what's possible. So my studio is full of sample quilts. I have every range of quilting, and I think that's a super important thing because especially if it's a new customer and they don't really know you, to be able to say, well, what do you think of this border? Or what do you think of this edge to edge? Or this is an edge to edge with a border, where you can actually show them some work that they can visualize. A lot of people are not good at visualization. I think that's why a lot of people make kit quilts. They see that, they like that, but
Hmm.
they can't envision it on their own. So I think it's incumbent upon us as, the professionals to help them navigate that. And then budget is a huge deal. I mean, I say, okay, what's the limit? I come right out and ask them, what's the limit? And if they
Hmm.
tell me, well, 150, then we're not talking custom right off the bat. I'm
Right.
not going to waste my time.
Right. Was it scary for you the first couple times to ask people what the budget limit is on their quilt?
No, I started out right away with, what's your budget? What do you want to do with this? What is this quilt for? That's the first question. Who's it for? What's it for? And what's your budget?
Have
And
you ever had anybody who acted offended when you asked that question?
no, I never have. Looking back over all the years I've been quilting, I've never really had anybody say, whoa, I have no idea.
Hmm.
Um, because usually people have a pretty good idea. And then if they're not sure, I say, well, how much did you spend on the fabric? This is a good question too. Well, I got probably $300. So you spent $300 on the fabric. You want to put $100 quilting job on there?
Hmm.
It kind of makes people think about, what they really want the quilt to be.
Mm. Wow, those are great tips. They really are. I think your insight about how, communication is important. And I think a lot of times people don't think to ask the question of what's your budget because and that really helps you get on the same page with your customer.
And I think the matter of factness with which you just naturally approach that is probably quite valuable too, because as Andrew was alluding to, asking if it was awkward or if anybody got offended by that, they if they did get offended by that, I would think that it would be with a person that was already uncomfortable asking something like that. But it seems like a key piece of information, a key piece of the puzzle when you're getting ready to make their project, what is the budget?
Well, the other question that I think is equally important is what's the use of the quilt? Because if you want to make a really snuggly baby quilt, then that's going to determine what kind of batting I'm going to recommend. If you're doing a wall quilt, I'm going to recommend a totally different batting for that.
Mm-hmm.
So those are some pieces of information that are valuable for me to give them the best outcome for their quilt because they may not know.
Mm-hmm.
I had a customer, she's an engineer, and I never met her. She sent me quilts. She lived in Hawaii. And she would send me these detailed schematics of this design here and this design there. And sometimes I would just go, oh, this is not what this quilt is calling for. But she was so emphatic about it. And her sister got cancer and she called me up and she said, Linda, I'm sending you this quilt. I don't have time to design the quilting. Can you just quilt it however you think it's supposed to be quilted? It's for my sister. And I need it really quick. And so, I did what I thought the quilt should have. And I sent it back to her and she said, don't ever let me tell you how to quilt the quilt again. So there's the flip side too.
Mm, yes. Well, Linda, is there anything over the last year and a half since we last talked, either in the industry or in your own business that has surprised you or changed? And is there anything different you're doing now than versus the time when we first spoke?
Yes, yes. The thing that it's as an industry overall, not just the long arm machine quilting, but there's a lot of quilt shops that I don't know if it's just in my region, but I'm hearing about it in other places too, that quilt shops are closing or they're closing their brick and mortar and they're going to online only. And what I've noticed here in Michigan is a lot of the shop owners are older and they've owned the shop for 30 years or for however long, and they're retiring and nobody's buying the business. That's been really surprising to me. Um, because quilting is still super popular. So I just think there's so many options that you have to really think about offering something different, in order to be a solid brick and mortar store.
Mhm.
So do you think the online form of business is overtaking or what do you see?
I think it has a lot stronger presence than it did prior to COVID. I think that really changed a lot of things in a lot of ways. I think that, you take quilt shows, for example, we had so many prior to COVID and, a lot of them closed. And for a lot of the vendors, that's their marketplace, that's their store. And so that's been the thing that kind of shocks me because I've been doing it for so long and it's such a huge part of my life. But yet, I just was at a guild doing a presentation last week and the week before, two different groups, and show and tell was just fantastic, quilt after quilt after quilt. So I don't see any lessening in the quilt making, which leads me to believe that, they're buying the fabric somewhere.
Mhm.
We have one question that I think I let it sit there a little too long. That while you were talking previously,
Mhm.
this listener is asking if you can share what battings that you will use in those kid quilts and
Okay.
Or the wall quilt.
or the wall quilts,
You mentioned
Sure.
different
etc.,
choices of batting. Yeah.
etc. They said so.
Sure. I don't know if you were aware of it, but several years ago, I did a batting study. I tested 80 different quilt bats. It was on my own dime. No manufacturer paid me. I got free samples of batting. 80 different samples came from just six manufacturers. And I tested them exactly the same way. And it was shocking to me, things that I thought I knew about batting that I didn't know about batting. So that led me down the path of, okay, this is what I want to put in this quilt. This is what I want to put in this type of quilt. So for me, if you want a snuggly baby quilt, then I'm not using 100% cotton. I'm going to use an 80/20 or even a 50/50 because
Mhm.
you want it to be snuggly and envelop the child. If you're using a wall quilt, then I want to use cotton with scrim because the scrim is that interior mesh, sort of, if you think of like bridal illusion, that they needle punch the cotton fibers into, and that holds it straight and flat. And if you've got a quilt that you're hanging on the wall and it's going to be up there for a number of years, it is not going to sag.
Right,
Uh,
because a scrimless batting is very stretchy.
exactly. And it's also scrim is much nicer to quilt with because you can pull on that. You get a wrinkle in the middle of your machine. You don't want to flip up the thing, you just want to tug it on the end. Boy, it just smooths right out.
Hmm. Now, how do you consider the density of the quilting? Because if you quilt too densely on that kid's quilt, it's not going to be snuggly anymore. Do you have any
Well,
rules of thumb for how many inches apart for the lines of stitching?
yes, when it is a baby quilt, for example, I am never going to use a pattern that is smaller than 6 or 7, 8 inches. If you're talking about an edge to edge, for that very
Hmm.
reason, because the more quilting, the stiffer the quilt. So,
Hmm.
and if you look at a lot of the patterns that are out there that are geared toward children, there's a lot of space in between just by the nature of the design. So,
Hmm.
I think it's a pretty good marriage.
Hmm. Interesting.
Well, what is your current approach to marketing, social media? Do you advertise differently now, like with social media? What about that?
Well, as you know, I'm an avid quilt maker. and I'm constantly posting them on social media. If I quilt a quilt and I have permission, I never post anything without permission. I will post that as well. To be honest with you, I don't do as much advertising as I did in the beginning. In the beginning, I was everywhere. I mean, I had flyer. No, you gotta remember, this is no Facebook, no Instagram, you know. So
Mhm.
I did something that was maybe a little devious. Can I admit it? And you won't judge me?
We'll
Well,
see.
you better
Let's
admit it
see what it
first.
is first.
So I made little bookmarks, okay, of my business. And I went to the library and I tucked them in the pages of the quilt books.
Nice,
And I
nice.
actually got some business that way. But again, that's, 1999, 2000.
Well,
So
what a thoughtful touch, because they're going to need a bookmark as they're reading this book.
I never got a call from the librarian, so I don't think I got in trouble. But as far as marketing, I do a lot of email. I have a very robust list that spans all those years. And I get a lot of, because I travel and do guild presentations, I do get customers that way too, because they see a particular quilt that I've brought, which is why if you're just starting out, show and tell at your local guilds is super important because quilters are visual for the most part and they see something, they go, wow, that's really good. That's what I want on my quilt.
hmm hmm
So, notwithstanding your covert library activities of the past, um, do, do you nowadays are you primarily what is your strongest promotion of yourself nowadays? Is it the guilds or is it social media?
I think it's probably 50-50. But in years past, it was more social media. I wrote a blog for a number of years. I've been a slacker since COVID in that regard. It took me a while. COVID was really hard. So many friends in the industry, lost their business and it was really, really difficult. And I just wasn't inspired. So I need to kind of regroup and, look at that again to see if it's something that I want to continue. But I was always posting tips and tricks and, little video clips and things. And it takes time.
So I'm curious, when you started your business, it was with a hand-guided gamma,
Yes.
and then it was how many years before you went to the Statler?
Uh, 4 years.
4 years. Okay. So you built your business with the hand-guided, or at least you started,
No, well, okay, so my goal was not to be in business. I didn't want to be in business.
and yet here
I
you are.
I had an advertising company that I was running and but I made quilts and I had 40 quilt tops and I thought, if I pay someone to quilt these 40 quilt tops, I'm halfway to buying a machine.
hmm
So I'm going to buy the machine. And then I'm going to quilt, however many more to get it paid off.
hmm
And then it just took off like crazy. And then I ended up selling the business and doing this full time. And then I started traveling and teaching and, the whole,
So why would you choose to be a quilter over being in advertising?
uh, that's a long conversation. But it's a very demanding industry. It's very stressful. I had a pretty significant health scare. I'm not going to lie. And when you get that 2x12 upside the head, and you get a little sign from above that says, girl, these 14, 16-hour days are not good for your health. And so it really made me think about what my life was. And the cool thing about machine quilting as a business is you get to decide. You get to decide how many quilts you want to do in a week. You get to decide if you want to take a week off. You get to
hmm
decide if you want to quilt till 2 in the morning. Whereas in the corporate business world, your daily agenda or plans are set by someone else.
hmm
So that had a huge appeal for me.
Hmm.
It sounds like there's a in the quilting business that you have gone to. There's more of a self-determination and some peace involved.
Well, even though I owned the company, and I had employees, I got to make payroll. I got to worry about where the next sale's coming from. Whereas all I have to worry about is me,
Mhm.
and that was a lot less stress. So for me, it was really a godsend, quite
Mhm.
honestly.
What does your work rhythm look like in a typical month?
Well, I am really a weirdo. I'm a night owl and I'm not a morning person. So I get up, I have my coffee, do my little devotion, then I maybe make breakfast. If it's a gym day, I go to the gym, then I come home, and then my day starts. But I've been known to quilt, my husband will come down and say, I'm going to bed now, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's 12 o'clock. I don't know what happened. Um, but you know, when I first started, I was juggling the company and a lot of quilters do that. Maybe they're a nurse or they have an office job and they quilt part-time. And then, that balance starts to shift where you're spending more time doing this than your other job. That's when you have to make that decision about what am I really going to do? Um, but I like to stay on a quilt, until it's done.
Mhm.
I have a weird little story from when I was hand guiding. I was quilting this quilt and I had an interruption or I had to go somewhere and I did, if you're going to do the border and you're going to freehand it all the way around, you start over here, you go over here, you go down here. So then the next day I came back and I start over here, go across the bottom, come up, meet where I ended. Well, I was doing hand guided feathers
Mhm.
and I got it on the machine and they did not match.
Mm.
I sensed where that was going. Yeah.
Yeah.
Shoot.
Well, fortunately, it was my own quilt. So rather than frog all that out, I just cut the borders off and put the binding on.
Yeah, that's a lot of ripping. You wouldn't want to do that.
No,
So tell me a little bit about when you went from hand guiding to the Statler. Now, are you a very was the computer maybe it wasn't scary at all for you?
no, I've been my own IT person for years because when you own your own company, it's like, okay, I either can figure out how to do this or I can pay somebody big bucks to do it. And there were
Mhm.
certain things that I'm like, well, I can learn how to do this. So no, it wasn't scary for me. And as a matter of fact, I took to it rather quickly and I bought mine directly from Paul.
Hmm.
And there weren't a lot of resources.
No, there wasn't all the classes and stuff then
No.
like we have
So
now.
today it's so much easier. I mean, you can watch a video, and but I took to it right away and I still, I was taking the belts off, putting the belts on, take the belts off because I was going back and forth because I always look at how I determine what I want to do on that quilt, whether I'm going to use a computer or me, is speed, efficiency, and outcome. So if I can do it quicker, hand guiding, then I can click around and do all the stuff you have to do. Then that's what I'm going to do. If it gives me the same outcome.
Hmm.
Sometimes, the computer is better. So
Hmm.
I'm always weighing those things out. That's why I think it's super important. Even if the person starts off with just a Statler, like they don't know anything about hand guided, I think it is invaluable to learn how to hand guide because there are just times when it makes so much sense.
Hmm.
That's just me on the soapbox.
What would you say is the ratio of, computerized versus hand guided that you do?
Um, well, a lot of it depends on the quilt, but again, it all goes back to that same equation. But
Speed, efficiency, and outcome.
yeah, and it depends on how much I gotta click around, you know,
Hmm.
because sometimes I can just sew it faster.
I was in a lady's studio a couple of weeks ago, and she had a Vision 2, 22-inch machine, beautiful hand-guided machine, sitting in there at a T at an angle with her Statler machine. And she explained to me that when she had her hand-guided machine upgraded to a Statler, she was worried that it would be sitting there doing edge to edges all day and she would have nothing to do. And so, at the same time of upgrading to the Statler, she bought this smaller machine to do her hand guided work with. And her question to me was, since, as it turns out, I do all my hand guiding and all my custom and all my edge to edge on the Statler. That poor other machine is just sitting there not being used. She said, "What would it take to turn that one into a second Statler?"
Yeah.
And
And that would be the same for me because to go back and forth on one, I'm on one quilt. So
mhm,
for me, I would never own a purely hand-guided machine. Um, it's such a perfect marriage in my mind, between the technology and, I mean, we use technology for everything else.
sure. How long ago did you did the Ascend upgrade then?
I did not.
You got an Ascend retrofit?
No, I just have a Statler.
Oh, you have a regular Statler.
Yeah,
Oh, well, very surprising to me. You
I
seem
know.
like the person who would be very particular about how her stitches look.
Well,
We'll have to
interestingly
talk
enough,
after the podcast.
interesting, I know. Well, trust me, I've been kind of waiting to see. I'm the person that never buys the new model car the first year it comes out. I like to wait and see how things kind of, flesh out. And so I've been talking to some of my friends that have them and, people that I know in the industry and I'm toying with the idea. I have not ruled it out. And I have not ruled out a whole new machine either because my machine is old. And it's been babied and well taken care of, and I've done every upgrade aside from the Ascend. I've put on new motors. I think I'm on my third computer.
Mhm,
So, but it has the most perfect stitch, and I'm an absolute maniac about tension.
mhm,
I have it dialed in. My
mhm,
machine and we are in a perfect marriage. So
mhm.
there's a little bit of nervousness about that. I got to be honest with you, because we don't like change, do we?
Only when it's good.
Yes.
Well, we have one person is asking a question. Being located in the midst of a big sports state, are you doing a lot of Michigan State, University of Michigan quilts? And Pat is saying, I'm a MSU Spartan living in Georgia and wondering if which schools you have quilted. Have you done any?
Very
All of the above.
sports-oriented questions.
All
Yeah.
of the above. And my husband's from Nebraska, so I get a few of those too from family, people back in Nebraska. So
Hmm
I have to split my allegiance to MSU and Huskers. Got to be honest.
hmm
Gotcha.
hmm
And on our conversation about the Ascends, Anne has just commented on here that her first machine was the Ascend last August, and she loves it. Much more to learn, but so far she's done 46 quilts.
Awesome.
FYI.
Yeah, I've heard nothing but good things, so it's
hmm
on my list. But I've had a little bit of a paradigm shift personally. I've taken more time this year for charity quilts. I was really starting to look at my stash, and it was kind of starting to close in on me a little bit. And when you've been a quilter for 50 years, you tend to collect a lot of fabric. And so my goal this year was to do a lot of charity quilts. I'm up to 42 right now.
Mm. Wow, that's a
Nice.
lot.
Yeah.
That's more than one a week.
Well, the beauty of having a giant machine, a 30, is, I can just string them one right after another on the same roll, and
Hmm
fill up
Mm.
that space.
Share the backing.
Yeah. Or I'll
Yeah.
just sew them together,
Yeah.
and then just back and forth, back and forth.
Yeah. I was gonna ask you, because you've been in business for quite a long time, um, it, how would you characterize I mean, it's basically full-time work at this point, right?
Um, I'm I'm kind of transitioning to what I would consider to be three-quarter.
Mm-hmm.
I'm taking more time for me. I'm taking more time for my health. I think that's at my age super important. I work out 5 days a week at a gym. And I don't want to be that little old lady that, can't get up out of a chair without help or grabbing the table. So I've taken much more concerted approach to, being fit and healthy. And I've
Mm-hmm.
always been kind of an exercise person, but never to this level. So, but I think that is important too with the machine because you're crawling around, you're pulling up batting, you're hefting rolls of batting, down to cut the thing if you don't have this cool rack that your husband made you. Um, you got to be, you got to be aware of that. And the other thing is, if you are doing any hand guiding, the more fit you are upper body, the easier it is. I can quilt for 8 hours straight and not even feel a thing.
Hmm.
And a lot of what you're alluding to there kind of refers back to the self-determination, the piece of having control of your own schedule, you know.
Hmm.
Yeah, and that is, I think, one of the most underrated conversations that, when I was selling machines full time for Gamma, um, that was the thing that I tried to impress upon my customers because there is so much power in that and so much peace that comes with that that you can't, unless you're in it, if you've never been self-employed, it's really hard to describe how amazing it is to say, you know what? I'm going to go outside and spend the day in the garden today. And maybe tonight when it's dark out, I'll be, in my studio quilting. I mean, that's a common thing for me. I'm not the kind of person I was, but now at this point in my career, I'm not the kind of person I'm in my studio at 8:30 and I'm in here till 5.
Hmm.
I did that for a lot of years.
Hmm. And when you're building a business, that might make perfect sense.
Oh, I think it's absolutely, I mean, you got to be intentional, that
Hmm.
you can't just sit down and watch, stream 5 TV shows in a row and, I mean, you got to be involved.
Hmm. So you said that you had over 40 charity quilts done this year, which is
Mhm.
awesome. How many customer quilts then? I mean, some of them are very intense, right? You have the same quilt on the frame for days.
Well, yeah, to be honest with you, I think I'm only at about 25, because I have gotten a lot of higher custom and I did intentionally take less because I felt really like I've been so incredibly blessed by this quilting industry that I felt it was incumbent upon me to put some of that out there.
Hmm.
And so I've never ever in my all the years I've been quilting, I've never set down that kind of goal and been
Hmm.
that intentional about it. I made some here and there. I quilt some for a good customer, for their charity or whatever. But to commit to making the top, quilting it, binding it, the whole thing. I mean, that it just felt really good. But
Hmm.
I'm kind of taking a pause from that. I
Right.
have two left to bind and then it's, full speed ahead.
Well, I think it's fair to say that no true success can never be measured in the bank account. Um, Maybe failure sometimes can be measured in your bank account,
Oh yeah.
but true success goes way beyond um, keeping the bills paid, you know. A lot of
I
people can do that.
Yeah, I've been working on one show quilt that's mine. It's actually behind me on the wall. Now it's finished. The applique and the piecing are finished, but I've been working on that since January and doing the charity quilts at the same time. And so I'm really excited to kind of move back into, where I'm getting back into being more productive.
Hmm. Hmm.
Not that the charity quilts weren't important, but
And I think that's a very important thing that Andrew mentioned that the true success is not entirely determined by the bank account. It definitely, I mean, we do need to meet our needs, but a lot of the things that you are talking about, Linda, are really reflect on the essence of what's really important in life, you know.
Yeah, and some of us, it takes us a while to learn that. We have to get a couple 2x4s up the head before we catch on to the fact of how important that is.
Yes, yes.
But the quilting business, interesting little story. A lady brought me this quilt. It was so horribly pieced. It was a,
Mhm.
I can't recall the name of it, but it was like a double wedding ring on steroids with points and I mean intersections and I don't know if you've ever had fried bologna in your life, but you know how it gets a hump in the middle? Well, every
Yep.
single block was like that. And she said, "Well, Linda, I'm not a quilter, but my mother made this, and is there any way we can quilt it? I've been to two other quilters in town, and they said they wouldn't touch it." And I said, "Well, if you're okay with an overall meander and you're okay with, you know, some fairly well hidden tucks here and there, I think I can do it." And I did it, and you know, it took a lot of ingenuity and soup cans and spray starch and you know all the tricks that we use. And I can't tell you how great it was. You know, it was like $150 quilt job to make this woman cry.
Mhm.
You know, it was a pita to quilt,
Mhm.
but that quilt gave me more satisfaction doing that for her than some of the really intense quilt where the customer is just like, "Oh my gosh, I love it," you know. So there's that side of it too, you know, that it's not just what you give away, but what you give to someone else that they weren't expecting.
Mhm. So looking back over the years that you've been in the quilting business, what's maybe been one of the most challenging seasons, and 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 how did you get through that?
Um, well, mine, the most challenging was the year that I broke my shoulder and my ankle in a ski crash. I had a huge backlog of quilts. I was totally destroyed physically, and I didn't know what the outcome was going to be. I couldn't stand, I couldn't walk, and I couldn't use crutches because it was they were both on the right side.
Hmm.
Um, and I actually called customers and said, "Come get your quilt. I don't know if I'm gonna, I don't know when." And a lot of them were like, "I'm on to 20 other quilts. I don't care, you know, just keep them and whenever you're
Get
back."
to it when you can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was a full 10 months before I was really back to snuff. So that year was probably my most challenging. And it was not just challenging on a physical level, but I missed the people. You know, I that's one of my most favorite parts about the job is you get to know the quilter, you get to know their stories, you get to know who the quilt is for and why they made it. And, you know, that is the part of doing this job that I think is a little bit underrated, you know, the relationships that you build.
Well, people don't know it until they get into it. What's funny is that for me, that's a lot of what gives me satisfaction in my work
Hmm.
because I've been in thousands of quilter studios talking with them about why they love their work and
Right.
charity quilts that they've done and the quilt for their mother, and all this stuff. And people who don't understand my job, they're like, oh man, you're out there on the road day after day, 12-hour days, sleeping in hotel
Right.
rooms. That must be a terrible job. No, it's the best job I've ever had, but you would have to know what makes it so crazy fulfilling, you know?
Yeah. And I don't, you know, when I've taught the business classes for 20 years, and that's something that you can't teach somebody. You know, you can't really explain that to them. You know, oftentimes
Mhm.
I talk about, you know, the financial side of it because a lot of people don't really get a grasp. They think, well, I'm going to charge this much and it's going to be, you know, this many quilts and I'm going to do the math and I'm going to make this much. And they don't really take into account the big picture of what I refer to as hard and soft costs, you know. Um, and you never really talk about what you just talked about. You know,
Hmm.
there's no really way to quantify that to somebody in a class and say,
Hmm.
this is going to be something you're going to see, you know. And I
Hmm.
suppose it's different for everybody, but I'm very much a people person. I need people.
So you alluded to, obviously the income earning potential of being in the quilting world and
Mhm.
and operating your Statler machine. What do you tell people? I mean, do you tell them from your own personal experience about what the hourly or monthly or annual earning can be, or how do you, because obviously it varies from person to person what they earn.
Yes, it does. And in my business class, I have been very upfront. I know what I want to make an hour, and I'm not working for any less. And it just kills me when I see quilters that, spend 30 hours on a custom quilt and charge somebody, $350 or whatever. It's like, go work at McDonald's, you'll make more money, you know? And
Yeah,
and
they're
so
hiring down the street at 17.85 an hour, you
same
know.
here, same here. But it really gets me wound up when I hear quilters say, well, no one's going to pay that. Well, you're making an assumption. When you call your plumber to come out and, fix the leak you have, he tells you it's $125 to show up and it's 35 or 55 or whatever the rate is an hour to fix it. They don't they don't feel bad about, I have said this for decades, literally. It's not your job to make somebody's hobby more affordable. It's your job to make a living or to supplement your income, whatever your financial situation is. And I think a lot of times, at least I hear that from students, well, nobody would pay me that. Well,
Mhm.
have you asked?
So what is your hourly target?
My hourly target right now is 45.
Hmm. Seems reasonable.
Well, when
And a
you think
lot.
about the cost of the machine, cost of insurance, cost of my website, the cost of my phone, electricity, heat, whatever. Um, when you really do the math, and I call those soft costs, a lot of quilters don't really think about that. I mean, if you don't have an insurance policy on your business, you are at a huge risk. Because if your homeowner's insurance company finds out that you're running a business from your home and you don't have a business rider or a separate business policy, and someone slips in your driveway,
Hmm.
and it happened to a good friend of mine who's actually in business. She didn't get sued by the person that fell. She got sued by their insurance company.
Hmm. Yes. I'm going to do a shameless plug for our Accelerate program. If people are wanting to operate a quilting business, one of the best things you can do is to sign up for the Accelerate program. You get a coach for 12 months who
Yeah.
walks you through building your business and helps you make sure that you do it right. And all these topics are pretty important,
Hmm.
and they're thoroughly covered in that program. But a lot of times people think about that program as just like a series of classes, and of course the classes are there in our portal, but I think the coaching is the most important aspect to that because, going at your on your own without a wise mentor is never really a good plan. So,
Well,
yeah.
and if you've never owned a business before, you don't even think about some of the things that you have to think about. I
Mm,
mean, I mean, I started my advertising company from nothing. So if there was a mistake to be made, I made it.
mm,
So I took that and just followed the steps that I knew worked over into, my quilting business. Um, but yeah, that sounds like a great deal because I mean, I have a golf coach,
mhm,
you know,
Yeah.
I have an exercise coach.
especially when you're starting something.
Oh,
Uh,
absolutely.
that's the best time to have a
Mhm.
coach
Sure.
because they can make sure that you don't make the common mistakes that everybody makes.
Right. Well,
And
and quite honestly, I would say if someone's even considering, I mean, I don't know how it works as far as on your end, but that would be something to go through even before you start out.
mhm,
Like if you're saying, okay, I'm going to get this machine, what do I have to do? What do I need? What are the steps? I
yeah.
think that would be really
We
valuable.
often have people order that program at the same time as ordering their machine
Yeah.
so that they
Mhm.
can,
Get
so that they
started.
can, yeah.
Sure.
It doesn't take a whole lot of things to pay back the cost of the coaching
Yeah.
because it's very valuable. So, what's one thing that you know today that you wish you had implemented sooner?
Oh, yeah. Well, this is an easy answer for me. When I first started quilting, as I mentioned, I had 40, actually I had 42 quilts in my walk-in closet waiting to be quilted. They were mine.
Mm.
My second year in business, at the end of the second year in business, I had 38.
Hmm. You didn't
Okay.
get very far on those.
No. So I did not schedule my own time. I did not schedule my own quilts. And it wasn't until I started competing nationally that I actually started scheduling. But the only reason I scheduled is because I had a show deadline and I was making a show quilt. And I'll be honest with you, I still have two of those original quilts that are not quilted.
Do you love them less?
Well, there's so much that's changed in the colors and the look, and I can't bring myself to part with them, but I can't bring myself to quilt them either. It's ridiculous, I know.
Linda, a lot of the people that are watching are in the earlier stages, some of
Okay.
the places that you've already been.
hmm
What would be some advice that you would give someone wanting to start a quilting business these days?
Well, the first thing I would say is you need to make some quilts. And you need to, have quilts ready so when you get your machine, if you're brand new, you have quilts to work on. I don't care if they're charity quilts, I don't care what they are. Um, get your feet wet, get your skill set up. You never want to start out, okay, I'm going to tell on myself. So when my first gamma got delivered at the end of my driveway, that's how we did it in those days.
Mm.
We got put together. The guy left and said, "Here's how you turn it on. Here's the light, and And my husband was on a 3-day business trip, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I think I have just made a huge mistake." So, it was hand guided, no stitch regulator, and I had made this diamond in a square Amish looking quilt. I never quilted anything, with any intensity as far as custom. Everything I did on my very first machine was just meander and all over stuff. And so I started quilting it, and I somehow in my rushing to, so excited, right? So when I was quilting the feathers, I went up the spine like this, and I went down the spine like this instead of like this on
Oh.
the whole stinking quilt
Mm.
because I wasn't ready for this giant quilt, okay? I should have practiced on something smaller to learn the feathers. I mean, I had quilted some feathers on my domestic machine, so I knew what the shape was, but it's a different animal when you're moving the pencil than when you're moving the paper. And I wasn't ready. And I was really hoping that that quilt would be something I could use to advertise my business. And when I got it all done, I was like, "Oh my gosh, Linda, this is terrible." I was so upset with myself. I just took it right out and threw it in the trash.
Mm. That's too bad.
Well,
That's
the
too bad.
worst thing about it is it would have been a great teaching sample when I started teaching what
Yeah,
to do.
there is, I
But it's
mean,
an it's an example of I wasn't ready. But
yeah.
yet this was a quilt that I wanted to take to my guild and show off my quilting skills.
One of the quilts that's in my home, I got it at a charity auction where it was a silent auction and they were raising money for the hospital for buying some neonatal equipment or something. Anyway, it's one of these dinners and there's a silent auction. And anyhow, this quilt was there and I really liked it. I liked the colors in it. I liked the quilting. It was obvious that it couldn't have been done on any machine that wasn't a Statler. So I knew it was a Gamma quilt. And
Okay.
so I bid on it, and I've got that quilt now. But afterwards, the woman who made it, Linda, she came up to me afterwards, and uh, she told me that she had made the quilt. And oh wait, you've got the same name, but anyway, different lady. And and she said, this was the first quilt that I made after taking the classes on my Statler machine and I wanted to use all the things that I'd learned in the classes.
Yeah.
And she loved the quilt, and I loved the quilt. But here, her friend, first time she saw it, she held it up and she's like, "Oh wow, that's beautiful. Too bad that the density of the quilting is not consistent throughout the quilt." And that landed on her like a ton of bricks because, in fact, There were some areas that were more densely quilted and other areas that were more lightly quilted. And it's a rookie mistake. It's
Yeah,
something that you only do a couple of times and then you never do it again.
right.
But we're all going to make rookie mistakes. That's what you do when you're new.
I have a little tip that I share with all of my students when I teach machine quilting, whether it's on, if you have a Statler or if you want to learn something new, you need to do it often. You need to do it every day. And when I was first starting, what I did, you know how you get the customer quilt and you got 4 to 6 inches if you're lucky on either side. Well, I would take a little strip of batting and a little piece of fabric and pin that onto that overage. First, I would ask my customer if they were doing anything with it and if they minded. I always put it under the guise of, so I get your tension perfect. Oh yeah,
Hmm.
that's fine, Linda, do what you need to. And I would practice whatever technique it was, whether I was manipulating a Statler design or I was doing something freehand. And, on my 30, I've got a fairly good stretch that I can do. Just that little bit every single day is amazing. Even if it's just, skewing a block or using one of the different, features of the Statler where you can change a pattern or go around a pattern, or maybe you want to do a fill or, just learning the different aspect of the machine. It's a small little thing, doesn't take you any time at all, but it's
Hmm.
every day. And then you get it in your brain.
Hmm.
So,
And on that note, I would also recommend, in addition to the Accelerate that Andrew was talking about, the new owner training that you can also find on gamble.com is a treasure for somebody that's very new starting out. Everything is on video, shows you how to do everything. So I
Hmm.
would definitely recommend.
well, the other side of that too, and you guys have done an amazing job with the road trip um, sessions. I've heard such great feedback from students that they've gone 2 day, three, whatever the time frame is that they could fit in their schedule.
Hmm.
There is nothing like hands-on. When
Hmm.
if you're having trouble understanding something and the person's right there showing you and then you do it, that just for a lot of people really clicks. So I think
Hmm.
anytime they can slot themselves into a hands-on session, that's really valuable too, especially if
Hmm.
you're starting out and the whole, you know, computer screen, the whole thing just seems like overwhelming.
Hmm. At
And
first it
any
does.
any any tutorials, anything that you can walk through that's a tutorial, that's really helpful too.
Hmm.
And it's an investment in you and it's an investment in your business. And if you just start out and fly by the seat of your pants, you're going to make the mistakes.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, we're getting close to the end of our time. I had one other question for you. Is there anything in particular that you're working on this year or looking forward to for this year, like maybe a big show quilt or something?
Well, yes, I mentioned the show quilt. It's the one that's right over my shoulder there.
Mm.
I expect that to be in the machine for quite a few hours. I'm really excited about it. I have not been inspired um, for that level of quilting for a couple of years, but I'm really, really excited to get back to it and really do some intense quilting. And then the other thing that I'm really looking forward to is I have quite a few guild events this year. So getting out with the people, that always makes me happy. So that's always a fun
Hmm.
time.
Awesome. Cool. Well, you mentioned having been on social media,
Mhm.
and do you want to share your Facebook name or Instagram handle or however? I'm not very up on social media. I try to stay away from it, but I have to get on
You're
Facebook
you're a wise man,
sometimes.
Andrew. It can be really, really beneficial, but it can also be a huge time suck. So you
Yeah.
got to kind
Where
of
can people find
balance
you
that out.
though? Yeah.
Well, my professional page on Facebook is The Quilted Goose, Linda Thielfoldt. And Instagram, I think, is the same. Um, and then, my website, if anybody really wants to reach out to me, or if you are a guild and you want to bring me in, my email is info@thequiltedgoose.com.
Fantastic.
Info at
Shameless plug there.
thequiltedgoose.com.
Yeah, might as
Yes.
well. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to to share this with us. As people are, making decisions about their own life, where they want to spend their time and what they want to be doing. I think it's incredibly helpful for people who've kind of walked that path before to share what it's been like. So,
Well, I have zero regrets and I would do it again in a heartbeat. And if I was to do it again, I would buy two machines. I would have one strictly for edge to edge and one for custom, and they would both run.
hmm
So if you have the means, um, highly recommended.
hmm well, it's not like the machine won't pay for itself.
No, and that is an absolute truth. Both of my machines have paid for themselves in less time than I thought it would take, honestly.
hmm Yeah.
Well, Linda, thank you so much. I think this interview has been a perfect balance of the tangible and the intangible elements of your experience with your Gamma machines, and
hmm
we really appreciate the time that you've taken with us today.
hmm
Well, thank you so much for having me. I hope that the insight maybe gives somebody a little more enthusiasm for starting down the path that I've been on and have been incredibly blessed by. Best thing I ever did, honestly.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Lyndon. We'll see everybody again in 2 weeks, right back here.
Okay,
Thank
bye-bye.
you. Bye bye.